Dear listeners, thank you for being here tonight. We will begin exploring a very special way of preserving meat in medieval times that few people today even know about. It is not the way taught in schools, not a recipe found in modern books. It was quiet, practical, almost forgotten now. In a world before freezers or packaged food, people needed more than just fire or salt. They needed time, patience, and something stronger than decay. They turned to honey, not for sweetness, but for survival. Fresh meat was cleaned in cold stream water, laid out to dry in shaded open air, then placed gently into large clay jars. Raw honey was poured until meat disappeared, every gap filled, every edge covered slowly. No air left, no rot could enter. The jars were sealed with cloth or wax, buried beneath stone floors or kept in darkness. They were not marked, not labeled, only remembered. When snow covered the fields and hunger returned, they brought out the jars in silence. Honey had thickened, darkened like amber glass, but the meat inside remained soft and whole, not spoiled, not dried, just preserved completely. They cooked it in stews or simple broth, a quiet meal, a quiet act of survival. This is where our story begins tonight. With hands that worked without knowing science, with families who stored life in golden jars, and with a truth we rarely speak aloud. What we forget may still remember us. They kept the jars beneath the cold stone floors, wrapped in cloth, behind wide and wooden panels, each one sealed with thick wax and resin. Some used ash and oil for protection too. Children were warned never to open those jars, not because they were dangerous or cursed things, but because they held something almost sacred inside. Each jar carried more than just preserved meat. It carried time, hunger, and quiet human trust. A kind of trust passed on through silence. One mother once whispered to her small daughter, "When you find this, I may not return, but you'll know how to survive with it." So the jars slept, undisturbed in the dark. Winters passed. Crops failed. Men never came back. Yet the jars remained untouched through every season, because opening one meant more than being hungry. It meant something deeper, something final and wordless. The air always grew still before they opened. They moved slowly, cutting the seal with care. The scent rose, quiet, warm, not quite sweet. Thick layers of honey hardened like golden glass. Below the surface, a shape began to show. Pale, whole meat wrapped in golden quietness, soft, unspoiled, preserved beneath months of waiting. No one spoke while lifting it with hands. No joy, no fear, only solemn attention. They prepared water and herbs for gentle boiling, laid out bowls passed down from older hands. That night, it fed 4 quiet and grateful people. A widow, 2 boys, and a tired neighbor. No one asked where the meat came from. They simply ate, slowly, carefully, respectfully, as if tasting something both present and gone. The youngest boy paused and looked at the bowl. "Why does this taste like nothing else?" The widow stared down, her voice barely audible. "Because it waited longer than we ever did." Outside, the wind pulled hard at the shutters. Inside, someone added more wood to the fire. They sat there, not talking, full and remembered. The boy never forgot that strange warm meal, nor the jar it had quietly come from. Years later, he searched for one like it. Behind the ruined chapel, he found a jar. The surface cracked, but the seal remained strong. The wax was hardened, but still holding shape. He carried it home, though he wasn't hungry. He opened it gently, not out of need, but to understand what others had once known. The honey inside was still thick and dark. The meat, untouched, rested softly in golden stillness. And he began to cry without any warning, not because he saw food from the past, but because he felt the hands behind it, hands now gone, but still speaking in silence. He did not eat, nor did he touch. He resealed the jar and placed it below, buried it again with both care and love. He marked the place with a plain stone, not as a grave, not a name, just a gesture left for someone unknown, the kind of thing we do without reward, for those who once waited and never returned. The jar was never meant to be glorious. It held no crown, no wealth, no secret power, but it carried the quiet weight of care. For generations, people hid them in stone walls, behind hearths, beneath beds, under heavy wooden floors. No one left notes. No one gave instructions. The meaning was known simply by being near. They would wrap meat in linen before placing, sometimes adding herbs, sometimes leaving it bare, but always sealing, always pressing it inward. The honey flowed slow and thick around flesh, no space for air, no opening for time. Each jar was made heavy with purpose. It was not meant to be opened quickly. It waited, as all important things must wait. One family kept theirs in a dry well, covered by boards, hidden beneath sacks of flour. Each season, someone would check the wax seal and whisper a name as they touched it. It wasn't a prayer and not a spell, just a name, the one who placed it. The act of remembering kept the jar alive. One winter, the river froze too early. Traps came up empty. No fish, no root. The youngest girl stood by the covered well. She waited until no one else was looking, then opened the boards with trembling bare hands. The jar was there, cold, dusted with frost. The wax cracked slightly under her careful breath. Inside, the honey had grown darker than pitch, but the meat still looked like something alive. She carried it home wrapped in her shawl. No one asked what she had done. They knew. They smelled the honey on air. That night they boiled it in a blackened pot, with dried mushrooms and half an old onion. It wasn't rich. It wasn't joyful or sweet, but it was warm. It filled the silence. And in the morning they rose with strength, still poor, still cold, but no longer empty. The girl grew. Years passed. Stories faded fast. But she remembered the weight of the jar, not just in her hands, but in memory. Not just the hunger, but the waiting itself. Later in life, she sealed a jar herself, quietly, alone, with fingers cracked from cold. She placed it behind the old stone stove. She did not tell her husband or child. She just whispered her name into the wax, and that jar waited. For someone. Someday. Because some things are planted, not for harvest, but for love no longer near the surface. Not all food was stored in clay and honey. Some had to be found in freezing silence. When rivers froze and nets came up empty, they turned to the water beneath the stone. In the cliffs behind the village, there were cracks, small paths that led downward into sleeping rock. They called them cold mouths, narrow caves breathing faint, wet air. The elders never spoke of them aloud, only showed the entrance once, then stepped back. It wasn't the depth that frightened them most. It was the stillness after sound had vanished. Young men would tie rope around their waists, not for safety, but to be pulled back if silence lingered. They stripped to bare skin in the cave, held breath not just in lungs, but in thought, then slid into the black, breathless water. The cold struck like memory, sharp and unforgiving. It burned, then numbed, then became part of them. They dove not for sport, not for bravery, but for the chance to feed one more night. Underwater, everything slowed. Light dimmed. The world turned inward. Fish gathered in still pockets near stone shelves. They did not move. Too cold. Too tired. The diver's hands moved without splash or sound. One fish, two, maybe three if luck stayed close. Then the rope tugged twice, the signal, and Hans pulled him back through the tunnel. He emerged shaking, skin blue and quiet. The fish were dropped near the fire to thaw. He did not speak for some time after. Not from pain, but from crossing that quiet place. The others sat near him, heads lowered gently. They knew what he had seen in the dark. Not monsters, not ghosts, just stillness deeper than any prayer. Later, as steam rose from boiling river fish, someone touched his shoulder and whispered thanks. That was all. No songs, no stories, no praise, only warmth in bowls and silence around fire, and the feeling that something ancient had watched. Some nights, boys would ask their fathers softly, "Why not fish the river like other villages?" And the fathers would answer with one slow phrase, "Because we still have stone and lungs." It was not a boast, not a joke. It was history wrapped in quiet defiance, and passed from skin to stone to breath, until no one remembered the first to dive. Only the cold, and the hands that came back shaking. The sickness came on a quiet wind, not loud, not fast, just endlessly creeping forward. First, a rash would bloom across the arms. Then came heat, shivers, and eyes turned inward. They never used its name in the village. They only said, "It has reached this house." Blankets were boiled in pine and bitter root, floors scrubbed with ash and old healing smoke. Still the fever spread without care or mercy. Mothers stayed near beds, wiping sweat from skin. Fathers carved useless wood, staring past the door. Honey was placed beneath the swollen tongue, crushed berries layered with bark on the chest. Every act was half memory, half desperate hope. One woman painted soot circles on her child. She whispered, "Spirits forget when paths are broken." Her daughter lived. No one questioned why. Others burned lavender in bone and brass bowls. Smoke rose thick until eyes flooded with tears. No one spoke when another name disappeared again. An elder placed coins over the burning eyes, not to weigh souls, but to cool fire. They pressed bark symbols under the patient's tongue, held herbs tight until the breath came steady. They were not doctors, only frightened, remembering people. Yet some survived. Some rose after the 9th night. They were called marked. Not holy, not cursed. Their skin held the history of burning days. The body changed. It would never forget again. When they walked, others stepped quietly aside. Not from fear, but deep, uncertain reverence. To survive was to carry pain's full shape. Years passed. A girl found cloth with ink. It showed ash symbols drawn by steady hands. She asked her grandmother what they once meant. The woman paused, eyes soft with distant memory. She touched her arm and gently whispered back, "That's how they kept me here, breathing still." Nothing more was said, but the girl folded it carefully away, placed it in a box beside dried herbs. The sickness left, but the memory never did. Healing became a ritual, not just recovery, a way to honor what the body endured. Not all stories are victory or sudden light. Some are quiet, hidden inside thin skin, like breath held for 9 long winter nights, or fire that waited without name or prayer. Some left jars. Others left different kinds of signs. Buried deep. Hidden. Marked in quiet, fading ways. Not for fame, not for those still living, but for someone lost, or someone not yet born. Behind certain stones were coins wrapped in cloth, folded papers tied with twine and cedar bark. Inside, names, old dates, or just one word. Remember. Wait. Forgive. Don't be afraid anymore. They were not messages. They were anchors dropped into time. So if anyone found them, they'd pause. In the woods, one tree had nails hammered inward. They weren't for hanging or holding anything heavy. They were pounded in at shoulder height, carefully, each one carved with one letter and a year. It told a story only the tree understood, a map made from metal, grief, and silence. In another home, under the stove's old brick, a girl found thread tied around chicken bones. They were arranged like stars, or teeth, or prayer. She brought them to her grandmother, confused and pale. The old woman looked once, then closed her eyes. "They were trying to trap something," she whispered softly. "Something that had already passed through our door. Not everything hidden was meant to be remembered. Some things were buried to stop their return. In river towns, they placed stones in soft cloth. Weighted bundles dropped into black water at dusk. No names spoken. Just one nod, one ripple. They said it took away what couldn't be buried. Even children knew not to ask why. They simply held the cloth with both hands, waited for the current to pull it under. Sometimes they found bundles caught in branches, open by accident, and always closed them again. It wasn't superstition, it wasn't fear. It was respect for the unfinished story, for the ones who had no proper end. One boy asked once, "What happens if we don't?" The elder stared at him, then answered slowly, "Then it waits, and waiting things learn to move." So every village had its own quiet tasks, not written, not shared, just quietly passed down. Beneath ovens, inside wells, tucked behind grave markers. They weren't warnings, they were kindnesses with no explanation, just small attempts to hold something in place. When everything else moved, they tried to leave stillness behind, and those who found these strange little signs, they often said nothing, but slept a little better. Some villages kept glass not for drinking, but for holding what could not be spoken. Small vials, stoppered with wax or stone dust, tucked beneath beds or inside thin wooden walls. They weren't filled with herbs or ash or wine. They were for tears. Only tears and silence. When grief came, and words refused to form, a person would cry into a quiet jar. One drop, maybe two, never too many. They'd seal it while breath still trembled, then hide it where no one would ever look. It was not for memory. It was not for mourning. It was for what they couldn't say aloud. Sometimes, years later, someone would find one. The liquid dried, the glass clouded by time and dust. But when held to light, still something shimmered. Not color, not shape. Just weight. Children once asked, "Why keep tears in glass?" And an old man answered, without raising his eyes, "Because some pain speaks too slowly for words." In one attic there were over 50 vials, all unlabeled, all sealed in different colored wax. A woman found them after her mother's death. She didn't open them, just touched each one gently. She knew they were moments too tender to read, moments no one else had been allowed to witness. So she buried them all beneath the orchard tree, not as waste, but as roots for things unsaid. Some say the fruit that year tasted strange, softer, sweeter, or maybe it was just memory blooming. Elsewhere, in a home near the stone hills, a boy placed his own jar beneath a shelf. He never told anyone whose name it held, but he visited it each year on one day, left a thread, or a flower, or a coin. Never spoke, never stayed long. "Only once," he whispered. "I'm still listening." Not everyone believed in keeping tears sealed. Some poured them into rivers at dusk, but even then, they would whisper names softly, as if the water might carry them onward. Not to gods, not to ancestors, just somewhere quieter. These acts were not rituals or law. They were small stitches in a torn world, little ways of saying, "I felt this, and it mattered once." Because long after grief fades from voice, the memory of its weight still lingers in glass. Each winter, when the wind grew bone-thin, they held a day with no real name. Not a festival, not a marked tradition, just a quiet exchange beneath gray sky. No songs, no banners, no bright colors, only hands carrying small wrapped bundles carefully. Some were hidden in shoes by the fire, others placed gently under worn straw mats. You might find yours in a bread basket, or tied with thread behind the water jug. No one claimed to be the giver. That was part of the warmth, not knowing who had remembered you. The gifts were never grand or polished. A folded scarf, a carved spoon, dried fruit. Sometimes just a note. You are seen. The smallest child once found a smooth stone. On it, the word enough, carved with care. He held it tightly the rest of winter. An old woman received a jar of seeds. There was no label, no instructions inside. Still, she planted them the next spring. They never bloomed, but she watered them anyway, and each time whispered, "You tried. I see." One year, a man gave nothing at all, not from forgetting, but from empty hands. So he left warmth instead. He lit the fire in someone's house before dawn. Another year, a girl left dried herbs tied together with string from her own sleeve. She didn't know if they would help, but someone, somewhere, slept easier that night. There were no rules, no exchanges expected. If you gave, you gave. If not, silence. And somehow that made it feel more true. Not obligation, not performance, just quiet care. Some years people gave things only once. Some kept giving, even when forgotten themselves. But no one ever spoke of the gifts aloud. That, too, was part of what made them whole. Years passed. People moved. Winters came colder. Yet still on that nameless day, somehow a package would appear by the door. Always simple, always small, always meaningful. Even if it held nothing but an empty cloth, folded so neatly it said, "I remembered." Because sometimes warmth isn't fire or food. It's knowing someone thought of you and asked for nothing in return. Deep in the forest, where paths blur into roots, a single lamp was kept burning through winter. It wasn't near a home or marked trail, just tied high between trees facing east. The oil was changed every 7 days. Even in snow, someone always made the walk. They didn't speak as they approached the tree, didn't pray, didn't wait for reply. They wiped the glass, refilled the copper basin, lit the flame, watched it settle, then left. It wasn't a shrine. It wasn't for protection or luck. It was for someone else. Someone lost, someone late, someone afraid. The villagers said nothing about the lamp, but every child knew its soft golden shape. They were taught, if you're lost, walk toward light, even if no one waits, even if no one remembers your name. The light does, and it never asks why you left. One man returned after 24 years. He had left after the flood and silence. He returned older, slower, worn by city cold. He followed the path by scent, not sight. And then, the lamp. Still burning. Still there. He sat beneath it for hours in snow. Didn't knock on any doors that night. Just wept quietly, as if the flame were family. Another year, a girl found the tree while running from a grief she couldn't carry. She didn't light it, just rested her forehead against the post. Then turned around and walked home again. The lamp asked nothing. It never flickered. Even in storms, the flame leaned but held. It wasn't magic, it wasn't holy. It was a promise without words or names. Each winter, a different person carried the oil. Some walked barefoot. Some wore bells on belts. Some left a note folded near the roots. "Come back if you're ready." Or simply, "Still here." And when spring arrived, the lamp stayed lit, until no more snow clung to the pine. Then someone would climb the tree, gently, snuff the flame, wrap the glass in cloth, carry it back until the next first frost. Because it wasn't the flame that mattered, but the fact that someone lit it at all. The old woman sat beside her low window. Outside, thick fog rested gently on the fields. In her lap, a folded cloth stayed warm. She didn't sew, just held it like memory. The house was quiet, filled with waiting breath. She reached beneath floorboards for an old box. Inside were coins, thread, and an orange peel. A small glass vial, a spoon, a map, each item without value, but full meaning. Each one belonged to someone no longer alive. She didn't cry. Her tears had long passed. Instead, she arranged them slowly on the table, as if lining up memories with careful hands. That evening, a young girl came to visit. Not a relative, just someone who brought bread. They sat in silence, still and softly breathing. The girl asked, "What are these strange things?" The old woman smiled, lips pressed without sound. "These are the things that kept us going." The girl picked up the spoon with interest. "Was it used to give someone medicine?" The woman shook her head and answered gently, "No, we used it to stir hope." She lifted a vial, cloudy but full. "This holds rainwater from the silent year." The girl stayed quiet, hands still and respectful. "I didn't know people kept such memories." "We didn't keep them," said the woman slowly. "They kept us, when nothing else remained." Silence followed, full of breath and understanding. The girl helped return each piece with care. Later, while walking home under the cold sky, she felt something strange settle in her chest. Not fear, not sorrow. Something older than words, like standing where others once quietly stood, and realizing her feet followed their soft paths. That night she folded her own small cloth. Not for purpose, not because of need, just to hide it somewhere no one looked. Years passed. The old house changed its hands. Seasons arrived and vanished without asking permission. But beneath the floorboard, one box remained waiting. Inside, thread, a spoon, cloth folded like breath. No one knew the story, but they paused. Because some things don't ask for remembrance. They simply wait for someone who understands silence. Thank you for spending time with us tonight. What we've explored may feel distant or familiar. Maybe it stirred a memory, or just made you pause for a moment. We'd love to know how it made you feel. Did it remind you of something or someone? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this quiet journey, consider subscribing to the channel. There's always more to uncover, more forgotten paths to walk together. Until next time, take care of your silence, and thank you for listening.